The woman standing in the doorway of the hiring office looked like she had already been told no 100 times, and Frederick Patterson could see it written in every tired line of her face. It was August 1876 in Cherry Creek, Colorado, and the summer heat beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street where ranchers gathered each morning looking for day workers. Yet this woman stood there with her shoulders squared despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. Frederick had only been half listening to the conversation drifting through the open window of the general store where he was purchasing supplies, but something about the desperate edge in the woman's voice made him pause. "Please, Mr. Henderson, I can work harder than any man you have got. I grew up on a ranch in Kansas. I know cattle, I know horses, and I am not afraid of hard work." Her voice was steady despite the pleading in her words. Tom Henderson, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, barely looked up from the papers he was shuffling. "I told you already, miss. I do not hire women for ranch work. It is not proper, and the men would not take kindly to it. Try the boarding house if you need work. Maybe they need help with laundry or cooking." Frederick watched through the window as the woman's jaw tightened, but she simply nodded and walked away with her head held high. She could not have been more than 23 or 24 years old, he figured, and there was something about the proud set of her shoulders that struck him. Most people who had been rejected that thoroughly would have slumped or cried, but not her. Over the next 3 days, Frederick saw her approach every major rancher in Cherry Creek. He learned her name was Felicity Pearson when he overheard her introducing herself to Marcus Wright at the cattle auction. She had the same pitch for each of them, explaining her experience, her willingness to work, her desperate need for employment. And each time, she received the same answer: no. Some were gentler about it than others. Old Samuel Crawford at least had the decency to explain that he already had a full crew and could not afford another hand, even though Frederick knew for a fact that Samuel was complaining just yesterday about being short-staffed. Others were cruder, like Buck Morrison, who laughed in her face and suggested she find herself a husband instead of trying to do man's work. Frederick noticed that with each rejection, something seemed to drain from Felicity, though she never stopped trying. By the 4th day, there were dark circles under her eyes and her dress looked like she had been sleeping in it. He wondered where she was staying, if she had any money left at all. He was not the type to insert himself into other people's business. Robert Patterson, his older brother, had always been the outgoing one, the one who made friends easily and spoke his mind. Frederick was the quiet twin, content to work his small ranch alone, speaking only when necessary and keeping to himself. When Robert had died 2 years ago from pneumonia, Frederick had inherited the entire ranch, and he had been running it by himself ever since with only occasional help from day workers. The ranch was not large by Cherry Creek standards, but it was respectable. 200 acres of good grazing land, a sturdy house that their father had built, a barn that could hold 20 horses, and a small herd of about 50 cattle. It was more than one man needed, really, but Frederick had never seen the point in expanding. He made enough to live comfortably and had no one to share it with. But watching Felicity Pearson get rejected for the 7th time in as many days stirred something in him that he had thought died with Robert. His brother would have helped her without a second thought. Robert had always been the one with the big heart, the one who brought home stray dogs and befriended drifters. Frederick had been content to watch from the sidelines, but now there was no Robert to do the right thing. It was a Friday afternoon when Frederick finally approached her. She was sitting on the steps of the closed mercantile, her head in her hands, and he could see her shoulders shaking slightly. When he cleared his throat, she looked up quickly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Miss Pearson," he he said quietly, surprised at how rough his voice sounded from disuse. He did not talk much these days. She stood up quickly, smoothing down her dress and straightening her spine. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a striking green, even reddened from crying. Yes. Do I know you? No, madam. My name is Frederick Patterson. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of town. He paused, suddenly unsure of what to say. The words felt clumsy in his mouth. I have been watching you try to find work this week. Her cheeks flushed red and she looked away. I suppose the whole town has been watching me make a fool of myself. That is not what I meant. Frederick shifted his weight, wishing he had Robert's easy way with words. I meant that I have seen you get turned away by every rancher in this territory, and I think they are all fools for it. Felicity's eyes snapped back to his face, searching for mockery or pity. Are you making fun of me, Mr. Patterson? No, madam. He took off his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. It needed cutting, but he never remembered to do it. I am offering you a job. The silence stretched between them for a long moment. A wagon rattled past on the street, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Felicity just stared at him like he had spoken in a foreign language. A job, she repeated flatly. Yes, I need help with the ranch. It is too much for one man, and I have been putting off hiring someone. I can offer you $30 a month, room and board and fair treatment. The work is hard, but I figure you already know that. Why? The word came out sharp and suspicious. Every other rancher in this town told me I was not fit for the work. What makes you different? Frederick considered the question carefully. I do not rightly know that I am different, but I saw how you handled yourself this week. You did not beg, you did not cry in public, and you did not give up even when you should have. That tells me you have got the kind of spine that makes a good ranch hand. Your gender does not enter into it for me. There will be talk, Felicity said, but he could hear the hope creeping into her voice. There is always talk. I do not pay it much mind. He met her eyes steadily. The house has 2 bedrooms. You would have your own space. I wake at dawn and expect a full day's work, but I am fair and I pay on time. If you can do the job is yours. Felicity bit her lower lip, and Frederick could see her weighing her options. Finally, she asked, When would I start? Tomorrow morning, if you are willing. I will come into town with the wagon at first light and collect you. Bring whatever belongings you have. Mr. Patterson, I should tell you something. She looked down at her worn boots. I do not have anywhere to stay tonight. I have been sleeping behind the church for the past 3 nights. The money I had ran out, and I was going to have to leave town tomorrow anyway. Something twisted in Frederick's chest. 3 nights sleeping rough, and still she had kept her dignity intact. Then I will collect you from behind the church at dawn. Be ready to work. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Mr. Patterson, why did you say you see my worth? Frederick looked back at her, confused. I did not say that. You did. You said they were all fools for not seeing it. That is not quite the same thing. But even as he said it, Frederick realized it was close enough. He had seen something in her that the others had missed or chosen to ignore. I suppose I just recognize when someone is willing to fight for what they need. That is worth something in this world. That night, Frederick cleaned Robert's old room for the first time since his brother had died. He had been using it for storage, and it took him several hours to move everything out and into the barn. He changed the sheets on the bed, swept the floor, and made sure the window opened properly to let in the breeze. It felt strange preparing the house for another person after 2 years of solitude, but it also felt right somehow. When he rode into town the next morning with the wagon, Felicity was waiting behind the church as promised. She had a single battered carpetbag that looked like it had seen better days, and she was wearing the same dress she had been wearing all week. Frederick made a mental note to advance her enough money to buy some proper work clothes. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," she said as she climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him. "Morning, Miss Pearson. You can call me Frederick. We are going to be working side by side, no need for formality." "Then you should call me Felicity." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the dirt road that led north out of Cherry Creek. The morning sun was just starting to warm the air, and the mountains in the distance were still tipped with the pink light of dawn. Frederick had made this journey thousands of times, but having someone beside him made it feel different, newer somehow. "Tell me about your experience," he said finally. "You mentioned growing up on a ranch in Kansas." Felicity seemed relieved to have something to talk about. "My father owned a small cattle ranch outside of Wichita. I grew up helping him with everything. My mother died when I was young, so it was just the two of us. He taught me to ride, to rope, to brand cattle, everything a son might have learned." "What brought you to Colorado?" Her face clouded over. "My father died 6 months ago. Heart gave out one day while he was mending fence. The ranch was mortgaged, and when he died, the bank took it. I did not have anything left, so I decided to head west. I heard there was work in the mining territories, but when I got to Cherry Creek, I found out they meant work in saloons and boarding houses." She paused. "I am not that kind of woman." "I did not figure you were," Frederick said. "What kind of work are you good at?" "All of it. I can break horses, though I am better with the gentling method than the rough breaking most men favor. I can rope and brand and drive cattle. I can shoot well enough to keep predators off the herd. I can mend tack and fix fences and deliver calves." "My father made sure I could do everything he could do." Frederick nodded, impressed despite himself. "That is more experience than most of the men I could hire. You will do fine." As they crested the hill that overlooked his property, Frederick pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is." The Patterson Ranch. Felicity's eyes widened as she took in the view. The house was a solid 2-story structure made of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. The barn was large and well-maintained, painted a traditional red that was fading but still respectable. Corrals spread out behind the barn, and beyond that, the pasture land rolled away toward the mountains. It was not the biggest ranch in Colorado, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "It is lovely," Felicity said softly. "It will do," Frederick replied, which was about as close to a compliment as he ever paid his own property. "Come on, I will show you around and then we will get to work." He showed her the barn first, introducing her to his 3 horses. A big bay gelding named Duke that was his primary riding horse, a gentle mare named Daisy that had been Robert's, and a young sorrel gelding named Rusty that he was still training. Felicity moved among them with the confidence of someone who knew horses, running her hands along their necks and speaking to them in a low, soothing voice. "They are good animals," she pronounced. "Well cared for." From there, he showed her the chicken coop, which he admitted he had been neglecting lately, the root cellar, the smokehouse, and the various outbuildings. Finally, they went into the house itself. It was clean but sparse, furnished with only the essentials. Frederick had never been one for decoration. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," he said. "Mine is across the hall. There is a washroom at the end of the hall. We share the pump, but there is usually plenty of water. Kitchen is obviously here, and you are welcome to cook for yourself or eat what I make. I am not much of a cook, but I manage." Felicity set her carpetbag down and looked around the kitchen. "I can cook," she offered. "My father always said I made the best biscuits in Kansas. If you do not mind, I could handle the cooking. It seems only fair since you are providing room and board." "I would not say no to that," Frederick admitted. "Like I said, I manage, but it is not something I enjoy." Then consider it part of my duties." She smiled for the first time since he had met her, and it transformed her entire face. She was actually quite pretty when she smiled, Frederick realized with some surprise. They spent the rest of that first day checking the fences in the north pasture. Frederick had been meaning to do it for weeks, but it was tedious work and he had been putting it off. With two of them working together, it went much faster. Felicity proved to be as capable as she had claimed, handling the tools with practiced ease and keeping up with him stride for stride. By the time the sun started setting, they had repaired 3 sections of fence and identified 2 more that would need attention soon. Frederick's back ached in a good way, the kind of ache that came from a full day's work, and he realized with some surprise that he had enjoyed having company. It was nice to have someone to hand him tools, someone to hold the post while he hammered, someone to exchange the occasional word with during water breaks. "You did good work today," he told Felicity as they walked back toward the house, tools slung over their shoulders. "Thank you. So did you." She paused at the porch steps. "Frederick, I just want you to know how grateful I am for this chance. I will not let you down. I believe you." And he did. There was something solid about Felicity Pearson, something dependable. He had made the right choice in hiring her. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a routine. Frederick woke at dawn every day, as he always had, and found that Felicity was usually awake before him, already starting breakfast. They would eat together in comfortable silence, then head out to tackle whatever work the ranch required that day. Some days they worked with the cattle, driving them to fresh grazing areas or checking them for illness or injury. Felicity had a good eye for spotting problems before they became serious. Other days they worked with the horses, and Frederick was impressed by her skill with them. She had not been exaggerating about her gentle approach to breaking horses. Rusty, who had been skittish and difficult for Frederick, settled down under Felicity's patient handling. In the evenings, they would return to the house tired and dusty. Felicity would cook dinner, and they would eat together on the porch if the weather was nice, watching the sun set over the mountains. At first, they did not talk much during these meals. Frederick was not used to conversation, and Felicity seemed content with the silence. But gradually, they began to open up to each other. "You said you had a brother," Felicity said one evening about 3 weeks after she had arrived. They were eating stew and the cicadas were starting their evening chorus. "Robert. He was my twin, actually. We were identical." Frederick stared out at the darkening landscape. "He died 2 years ago, pneumonia." "I am sorry. That must have been hard. It was like losing half of myself." The words came out before Frederick could stop them. He did not usually talk about Robert, not to anyone. "We did everything together our whole lives. Built this ranch together after our parents passed. I still catch myself turning to tell him something, and then I remember he is not there anymore." Felicity was quiet for a moment. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I start to ask my father something, and then I remember. It is like the grief hits you fresh all over again." "Yes, exactly like that." They sat in silence for a while longer, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of two people who understood each other's pain without needing to explain it. As the weeks turned into months, Frederick noticed things changing. The ranch was running better than it had in years with 2 people maintaining it. The fences were all in good repair, the animals were healthy and well tended, and he was finally getting around to projects he had been putting off since Robert died. But more than that, he found himself looking forward to the start of each day because it meant seeing Felicity. She had bought some proper work clothes with her first month's pay, trading the worn dress for sturdy trousers and shirts that were more practical for ranch work. Some of the more conservative ladies in town had apparently expressed their shock at seeing a woman in men's clothing, but Felicity did not seem to care. She wore what made sense for the work, and Frederick respected that. It was October when Frederick realized he was falling in love with her. They were out checking on the cattle one afternoon when a storm rolled in suddenly, as autumn storms in Colorado often did. They barely made it to the line shack on the far edge of the property before the rain started coming down in sheets. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small wood stove and a couple of bunks for cowboys who needed to stay out overnight with the herd. Frederick got a fire going in the stove while Felicity checked the horses they had tied up under the small overhang outside. "They will be fine," she reported, coming back inside and shaking water out of her hair. "It is not that cold and the overhang will keep the worst of it off them." Frederick nodded, feeding more wood into the stove. The shack was warming up quickly, but they were both soaked through. "We might be stuck here for a while. These storms can last hours. I have been in worse places." Felicity sat down on one of the bunks and started wringing water out of her shirttails. "At least we are warm and dry now." Well, warm at least, Frederick thought. Dry was debatable. He sat down on the other bunk, suddenly very aware of how small the shack was and how alone they were. It was not improper exactly. They worked together every day, lived in the same house. But somehow, being trapped in this small space with the storm raging outside felt intimate in a way their usual routine did not. "Tell me something about yourself that I do not know," Felicity said, breaking the silence. "We have been working together for nearly 3 months now, but I feel like you keep yourself pretty guarded." Frederick considered that. She was right, of course. He had never been good at opening up to people, even before Robert died. "What do you want to know? Anything? What did you want to be when you were a child? What is your favorite time of day? What makes you happy?" "Those are 3 different questions," Frederick pointed out, but he found himself smiling slightly. "When I was a child, I wanted to be a school teacher. I liked books, learning things. But then our father died and Robert and I had to take over the ranch, and that was the end of that dream." "And the other questions?" "My favorite time of day is early morning, just before sunrise. There is something peaceful about being awake when the rest of the world is still sleeping. As for what makes me happy," he paused, thinking about it. "This ranch, working with my hands, and lately having someone to share the work with. I did not realize how lonely I had been until you got here." Felicity looked at him with those green eyes, and Frederick felt his heart do something strange in his chest. "I have been lonely too," she admitted. "Even before my father died, I was lonely. People in town never understood why I wanted to work the ranch instead of getting married and starting a family. They treated me like I was strange." "You are not strange," Frederick said firmly. "You are just different. There is nothing wrong with that. You are different too, you know. Every other rancher in Cherry Creek turned me away, but you looked past what everyone else saw and gave me a chance. I will never forget that." The storm continued to rage outside, and they talked for hours, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing their favorite books, debating the best way to train a horse. Frederick could not remember the last time he had talked so much, but with Felicity, it felt natural. She had a way of drawing him out, making him want to share things he normally kept locked inside. When the storm finally passed, and they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, something had shifted between them. Frederick could feel it, and he thought Felicity could too. They were not just employer and employee anymore, not just fellow ranch hands. They were becoming friends and maybe something more, but Frederick did not act on his feelings right away. For one thing, he was not entirely sure how Felicity felt. She was friendly and open with him, but she had never indicated that she thought of him as anything more than her employer. For another, he was terrified of ruining what they had. If he told her how he felt and she did not feel the same way, it would make everything awkward. She might even leave, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with what they had. He told himself that having her friendship and her company was enough, that he did not need anything more. But as October turned into November and the air grew colder, it became harder and harder to deny what he was feeling. One evening in mid-November, they had just finished dinner and were sitting on the porch despite the chill in the air. Felicity had wrapped herself in a heavy shawl, and Frederick had brought out an extra blanket. The sky was clear and full of stars, and their breath made little clouds in the cold air. "I got a letter from someone in Wichita today," Felicity said quietly. "A lawyer. Apparently, my father had a life insurance policy that no one knew about. It is not a fortune, but it is enough that I could buy a small piece of land if I wanted. Start my own place." Frederick felt his heart sink. Of course she would want her own place. She was capable and independent, and she had been saving her wages carefully. He had known this day might come, but he had not expected it to hurt so much. "That is wonderful news," he managed to say. "Congratulations. I have not decided what I am going to do yet." Felicity pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The thing is, I am happy here, happier than I have been since my father died. Maybe happier than I ever was, if I am being honest. Working here, living here, it feels right somehow." Frederick did not trust himself to speak. He was afraid of what he might say, afraid of hoping too much. "But I also know this arrangement cannot last forever," Felicity continued. "Eventually, you are going to want to marry someone, start a family. Having a single woman living in your house will make that complicated. And people in town already talk. I heard some women at the general store last week saying that it was not proper, us living under the same roof." "I do not care what they say," Frederick said, finding his voice. "And for what it is worth, I have no plans to marry anyone. Never. I never met anyone I wanted to marry, not until—" He stopped himself, but it was too late. The words were already half out. Felicity turned to look at him. "Not until what?" Frederick could have retreated, could have finished the sentence some other way. But he was tired of being careful, tired of hiding how he felt. He was 30 years old, and he had already lost too much time to fear and caution. "Not until I met you," he said quietly. "Felicity, I know you came here looking for work, not romance. And I know I am just a quiet rancher who does not have much to offer. But somewhere along the way these past few months, I fell in love with you. I see your worth every single day. I see how hard you work, how capable you are, how strong and brave and kind. And I think if you left, it would break my heart." The silence that followed was the longest of Frederick's life. Felicity just stared at him, her expression unreadable in the starlight. He had ruined everything, he was sure of it. She was going to leave, and he would be alone again. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "You see my worth." "Of course I do. I saw it that first day in town when everyone else was too blind to notice. You are worth 10 of any ranch hand I could hire. You are worth more than you know. Frederick Patterson, you are not just a quiet rancher." Felicity's voice was thick with emotion. "You are the kindest man I have ever met. You are patient and generous and good, and for what it is worth, I fell in love with you too. Probably around the time we got stuck in that lined shack during the storm, though maybe it was before that. I have been too afraid to say anything because I did not want to risk losing what we have." Frederick felt like his heart might burst out of his chest. "You love me." "I do. More than I thought I could love anyone." She smiled, and even in the dim light, he could see tears shining in her eyes. "When you said you see my worth, It meant everything to me. No one else in my whole life has ever said anything like that to me. Not even my father, though I know he loved me in his way. Frederick stood up and crossed the porch to where she was sitting. He knelt down in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "Felicity, I do not want you to buy your own land and leave. I want you to stay here. Not as my employee, but as my wife, if you will have me." "Are you proposing to me?" "I guess I am. I do not have a ring, and I know I should probably do this more properly, but I cannot wait another minute. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Felicity laughed, a sound that was half joy and half tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." Frederick pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close. She fit against him perfectly, like she had always been meant to be there. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Cherry Creek. Some of the townspeople were scandalized, of course. There was plenty of gossip about how quick the courtship had been, and more than a few raised eyebrows at the idea of Frederick marrying his hired hand. But Frederick and Felicity did not care. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. Tom Henderson, the rancher who had been the first to reject Felicity's request for work, came up to Frederick at the reception. "I will admit, Patterson, I did not think that woman would amount to much as a ranch hand. But I have seen your place lately, and it is thriving. Maybe I was wrong." "You were wrong," Frederick said mildly, "but I am grateful for it. If you had hired her, I never would have met her." Henderson laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Fair enough, you are a lucky man." "I know," Frederick said, watching Felicity across the room as she talked to the minister's wife. She had worn a simple blue dress for the wedding, nothing fancy, but to him, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "I am the luckiest man alive." Their first year of marriage was not easy. Running a ranch never was, especially heading into winter. But they worked together, supporting each other through the difficult days and celebrating the good ones. Felicity proved to be not just a capable ranch hand, but also a shrewd business partner. She suggested they expand the horse breeding operation, focusing on the gentling method she had learned from her father. It turned out there was a strong market for well-trained horses, and within 6 months, they had more orders than they could fill. By the following spring, the Patterson ranch was more prosperous than it had been in years. They were able to hire 2 additional hands to help with the work, which gave Frederick and Felicity more time to focus on breeding and training horses. The extra income allowed them to expand the house, adding a larger kitchen and a small office where Felicity managed the business accounts. It was late May when Felicity told Frederick she was pregnant. They were out in the pasture watching the new foals play when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in there," she said softly. "Our baby." Frederick felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I saw the doctor in town yesterday. He says the baby should come in January if all goes well." Frederick pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. "I love you so much, both of you. We love you too." The pregnancy was not easy. Felicity suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Frederick felt helpless watching her struggle. He took over all the heavy work on the ranch, insisting that she focus on lighter tasks and take plenty of rest. She protested at first, not wanting to be treated like she was fragile, but eventually she accepted his help. As her belly grew, Frederick found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it. This was his child growing inside the woman he loved. It felt almost too good to be true. Like at any moment, he might wake up and find it was all a dream. On a frigid night in early January 1878, Felicity went into labor. Frederick rode into town to fetch the doctor and the midwife. his heart pounding with fear and excitement. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning, and Frederick paced the kitchen the entire time, listening to Felicity's cries from upstairs and feeling utterly useless. Finally, just as the sun was coming up, he heard a different sound, the wail of a newborn baby. The midwife came down a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Patterson, a big, healthy boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Frederick took the stairs 2 at a time. Felicity was propped up against the pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Frederick approached the bed slowly, almost afraid to believe it was real. When he looked down at the baby's scrunched-up face, he felt something break open in his chest. Love, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "He is perfect," Frederick whispered. "He has your nose," Felicity said with a tired smile. "Poor child." "My nose is fine," Frederick protested, but he was smiling too. He reached out tentatively and touched one tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, and Frederick felt tears sting his eyes. "What should we name him?" Felicity asked. "I was thinking Robert," Frederick said, "after my brother, if that is all right with you." "Robert Patterson." Felicity tested the name. "I think it is perfect." Little Robert was a good baby, all things considered. He cried when he was hungry or needed changing, but mostly he was content to sleep or look around with wide, curious eyes. Frederick was terrified of him at first, afraid he would break this tiny, fragile thing. But Felicity was patient, teaching him how to hold the baby, how to change him, how to soothe him when he fussed. As the weeks passed, Frederick's confidence grew. He found that he loved being a father, loved watching his son discover the world. When Robert smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, Frederick felt his heart might explode with joy. When he learned to roll over, to sit up, to crawl, Frederick was there documenting every milestone, boring anyone who would listen with stories about his brilliant son. Felicity watched all this with amusement and deep love. "You are smitten," she teased one evening as Frederick played with 9-month-old Robert on the floor. "He is remarkable," Frederick said seriously. "Did you see how he figured out how to get that toy? He is clearly very intelligent." "He is 9 months old, darling. All babies figure out how to reach for toys. Not like Robert does." Felicity laughed and shook her head. "I love you, Frederick Patterson. I love you too, both of you." He looked up at her with those serious eyes that had first captivated her years ago. "Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for taking a chance on a quiet rancher who did not have much to offer." "You had everything to offer," Felicity said, coming to sit beside them on the floor. "You saw my worth when no one else did. You gave me a home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. I should be thanking you. Then we will thank each other." Frederick leaned over to kiss her while Robert babbled happily between them, "And we will thank whatever fate brought us together." Over the next few years, the ranch continued to prosper. The horse breeding program that Felicity had started became well known throughout Colorado and even into neighboring territories. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy Patterson horses, which were known for being well-trained and reliable. Frederick and Felicity had 2 more children. A daughter they named Florence in 1880, and another son they named Franklin in 1883. The house rang with laughter and noise, a stark contrast to the silent years Frederick had spent alone after Robert's death. Little Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Florence was spirited and adventurous, always getting into some kind of mischief. And Franklin was still too young to have much personality, but he had inherited his mother's green eyes and what looked like her stubborn streak. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, Frederick and Felicity would sit on the porch like they had in those early days, watching the sun set over the mountains. They were older now, marked by the years of hard work and raising children, but the love between them had only deepened. "You remember the day we met?" Felicity asked one such evening in the summer of 1885. "When you found me sitting on those steps, ready to give up, I remember. You looked like you had been fighting the whole world and refusing to back down. I was so tired. I had been rejected so many times, and I was starting to think maybe everyone was right. Maybe I was not meant to do ranch work. Maybe I should have just given up and found work in a boarding house somewhere." Frederick reached over and took her hand. "I am glad you did not. I am glad I found you when I did. You saved me, you know, not just by giving me a job, but by seeing me. Really seeing me, for who I was and what I was capable of. When you said you see my worth, it changed everything for me." "You saved me too," Frederick said quietly. "I was so lost after Robert died. I did not even realize how lost until you came along and reminded me what it felt like to be alive. You brought light back into my life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching the stars come out one by one. "Tell me something," Felicity said eventually. "That day when you decided to offer me the job, what made you do it?" "Really?" Frederick thought about it. "I watched you get rejected over and over, and you never broke. You kept your dignity, kept your pride. It reminded me of something Robert used to say. That character is what you do when everything is working against you. You had character, and that is rare. I figured someone with that much character deserved a chance. Your brother sounds like he was a good man. He was. He would have liked you, probably would have hired you before I did, knowing him." Frederick smiled at the thought. He always did have better instincts about people. "I do not know about that. Your instincts were pretty good when it came to me. Best decision I ever made." As the years continued to pass, Frederick and Felicity became pillars of the Cherry Creek community. The ranch that had once been struggling under Frederick's sole management became one of the most successful in the territory. But more than their business success, people respected the way they had built their life together. The story of how they met became something of a legend in town. Younger women who wanted to do something other than get married and raise children would point to Felicity as proof that it was possible. She was rejected by every rancher in town until a quiet cowboy said he saw her worth and gave her a chance, they would say. And look at her now. Of course, some people never quite approved. There were always a few who thought it was improper for a woman to work a ranch, or who whispered that Frederick had only married Felicity because she made him money. But those voices grew quieter over the years, as it became obvious to everyone that Frederick and Felicity shared a deep, genuine love. In 1890, when Robert was 12 years old, he announced at dinner one evening that he wanted to be a rancher like his parents when he grew up. "I want to breed horses," he said seriously. "The best horses in Colorado, maybe in the whole West." Frederick and Felicity exchanged a glance across the table. "That is a fine ambition," Frederick said. "It will take a lot of hard work." "I am not afraid of hard work. You and Mama taught me that." "Yes, we did." Felicity reached over and ruffled her son's hair affectionately. "And we will teach you everything we know." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Frederick found Felicity in the barn. She was checking on a mare that was due to foal soon, running her hands gently over the horse's swollen belly. "She will drop this foal in the next day or two," Felicity said without looking up. "Maybe tonight." Frederick came to stand beside her, adding his own hand to the mare's side. He could feel the foal moving inside, pushing against his palm. After all these years, the miracle of new life still amazed him. "Robert wants to take over the ranch someday," he said. "I know. Are you surprised?" "A little." I always figured the children might want to do something different, see more of the world than just this ranch. Maybe the others will. But Robert loves it here. You can see it in the way he works with the horses, the way he walks the fence lines like he is memorizing every inch of the land. He has ranching in his blood. Like his mother, Frederick said, pulling Felicity close. Like both his parents, she corrected. This ranch is our legacy, Frederick. Everything we built together. I am glad one of our children wants to carry it forward. The mare shifted beneath their hands, and Felicity moved back. I am going to stay out here tonight, she said, just to keep an eye on her. Then I will stay with you. They brought blankets out from the house and settled into the hay in the stall next to the mares. It was reminiscent of those early days when they would work until they were exhausted and then collapse wherever they happened to be. As they lay there in the warm darkness of the barn, listening to the gentle sounds of the horses, Frederick felt a deep sense of contentment. Felicity, he said softly, do you ever regret it? Coming to Colorado, going through all those rejections, ending up here? She was quiet for a moment. No, never. Every rejection, every hardship, it all led me to you, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even sleeping behind the church. Even that. Though I am glad I do not have to do it anymore. They both laughed softly, and Frederick pulled her closer. The mare nickered in the next stall, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared over the years. The mare did foal that night, delivering a beautiful chestnut filly with a white star on her forehead. Frederick and Felicity helped with the birth, working together with the practiced ease of people who had done this countless times. When the foal finally stood on wobbly legs and began to nurse, they both felt that familiar rush of satisfaction. That never gets old, Felicity said, wiping sweat from her forehead. No, it does not. They stayed in the barn until dawn, making sure the mare and foal were both doing well. When they finally walked back to the house as the sun was rising, they were tired and dirty and completely happy. The children were just starting to wake up, and they all came running when they heard about the new foal. Even little Franklin, who was only 7, was excited. They all trooped out to the barn to see the baby, and Frederick stood back watching his family with a heart so full it almost hurt. Robert immediately wanted to know if he could help train the filly when she was old enough. Florence declared that the baby was the prettiest horse she had ever seen, and asked if they could name her Princess. Franklin just stared at the foal with wide eyes, reaching out tentatively to touch her soft nose. This is what it is all about, Felicity said quietly, coming to stand beside Frederick. Not the money or the success, but this. Our family, these animals, this land, everything we built together. I know, Frederick said, putting his arm around her waist. I know. As the 1890s progressed, the Patterson ranch continued to thrive. Robert grew into a capable young man who had inherited the best qualities of both his parents, his father's quiet steadiness and his mother's determination. He was particularly gifted with horses, able to gentle even the most difficult animals with patience and understanding. Florence, at 13, was showing signs of wanting something beyond ranch life. She loved to read and often talked about becoming a teacher. Frederick and Felicity encouraged this, making sure she had access to books and arranging for her to have additional schooling beyond what the small Cherry Creek schoolhouse offered. Franklin, the youngest, was still finding his way. He loved the ranch but did not have Robert's single-minded focus on it. He was more interested in how things worked, always taking things apart to see their mechanisms and trying to put them back together. In 1895, Frederick's parents would have been in their 70s if they had lived. Standing in the small family cemetery on the edge of the property where they were buried, Frederick thought about how much had changed since they had passed. His father had built this ranch from nothing, and his mother had made it a home. Robert had helped him expand it, and then Felicity had helped him save it from the loneliness that nearly consumed it. "I wish they could have met you," he told Felicity, who had come to stand beside him. "My parents and Robert, they would have loved you. I wish I could have met them too. But I think they are proud of what you have done with this place, what we have done together. I hope so." As they walked back to the house, Felicity said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "We should start writing things down. The history of this ranch, how we met, all the things that have happened over the years. Someday our grandchildren will want to know these stories, and we will not be here to tell them." Frederick considered this. He had never been much of a writer, but Felicity had a point. "You always were the smart one in this marriage. We are both smart, just in different ways." She squeezed his hand. "I will write it down, all of it. How I came to Cherry Creek with nothing, how I was rejected by every rancher in town, how you were the one person who saw past what everyone else saw, how you said you saw my worth, and how that changed everything. It was not just me who changed things. You worked hard, proved yourself. You made this ranch what it is today. We did it together," Felicity corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." That evening, Felicity started writing. She filled page after page with her neat handwriting, documenting everything from that first meeting in Cherry Creek to the birth of their children to the growth of the ranch. Frederick would sometimes read over her shoulder, adding details she had forgotten or correcting small facts. "You make us sound more romantic than we are," he said one evening, reading about their proposal. "We are exactly that romantic. You just do not realize it because you are living it." She set down her pen and looked up at him. "Frederick, we are the love story that everyone hopes for. Two people who found each other against all odds, who built a life together, who loved each other through good times and bad. That is romance." "When you put it that way," Frederick said, leaning down to kiss the top of her head, "I suppose you are right." As they moved into the new century, both Frederick and Felicity were aware that they were getting older. Frederick's hair was more gray than brown now, and he moved a little slower than he used to. Felicity had laugh lines around her eyes and hands that were weathered from decades of ranch work. But their love had not diminished. If anything, it had grown stronger with time. In 1903, Robert married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. It was a joyful wedding, and Frederick found himself thinking about his own wedding nearly 23 years earlier. Had he really been that young once? That uncertain, "You are getting sentimental in your old age," Felicity teased him during the reception. "I am allowed to be sentimental on my son's wedding day," Frederick protested. "Besides, you are crying too. Those are happy tears. There is a difference." A year later, Robert and Sarah had their first child, a boy they named Frederick after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Frederick felt the same overwhelming love he had felt holding his own children. The circle of life continued, each generation building on what the last had created. Florence did become a teacher, taking a position at a school in Denver. She came home to visit often, bringing stories of the city and her students. Franklin surprised everyone by developing an interest in engineering, and took a job with the railroad, helping to maintain and improve the tracks that now connected Colorado to the rest of the country. But Robert stayed, working the ranch alongside his parents and gradually taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations. Frederick was grateful for this, as his body was not as strong as it used to be. There were days when the old injuries from decades of ranch work flared up, when his back ached or his hands were too stiff to grip a rope properly. "You should slow down," Felicity told him one such day in 1906. They were both in their 50s now, which seemed impossible. How had so much time passed? I am slowing down, Frederick protested. Robert does most of the heavy work now. You are still out there every day working like you are 25 years old. What else would I do? Sit on the porch and watch the world go by. You could read more. Spend time with your grandchildren. Rest. But Frederick could not imagine just resting. This ranch was his life's work, his legacy. As long as he was able, he would keep working it. In 1910, tragedy struck when Sarah died giving birth to her and Robert's fourth child. The baby, a little girl they named Ruth, survived, but Robert was devastated by the loss of his wife. Frederick watched his son struggle with grief and recognized it all too well. It was the same grief he had felt after losing his own brother all those years ago. "It will get better," he told Robert one evening as they sat on the porch. Ruth was sleeping in Frederick's arms, and Felicity was inside making dinner. "Not quickly and not easily, but eventually the pain will become bearable." "I do not see how," Robert said, his voice hollow. "She was everything to me, I know. But you have to keep going for your children. They need you now more than ever." Robert looked at his sleeping daughter and something shifted in his face. "You are right. Sarah would want me to be strong for them. She would. And we are here to help. Your mother and I, we will do whatever we can." And they did. Felicity helped care for baby Ruth and the 3 older children while Robert worked through his grief. Frederick spent extra time with his son, working alongside him and offering quiet support. It was not so different from how Robert had once supported him through his own dark times. Slowly, Robert began to heal. He would never stop missing Sarah, but he learned to live with the loss. He threw himself into raising his children and running the ranch, finding purpose in continuing what his parents had built. In 1915, Frederick and Felicity celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The family threw a big party at the ranch, with people coming from all over Cherry Creek and beyond. Even some of the ranchers who had once rejected Felicity came to pay their respects, acknowledging what a remarkable woman she was and what an incredible partnership she and Frederick had forged. Tom Henderson, now in his 80s and long retired, made a special toast. 40 years ago, I turned away a woman asking for ranch work. It was the stupidest decision I ever made, because that woman went on to help build the most successful horse breeding operation in Colorado. Frederick Patterson was smart enough to see what I missed, and I have spent the last 40 years being jealous of him for it. Everyone laughed, and Frederick raised his glass to the old rancher. To being stupid enough to let the best ranch hand in Colorado slip through your fingers. To stupidity, Henderson agreed, and they all drank. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and only family remained, Frederick and Felicity walked out to the pasture where they had spent so many hours over the years. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. 40 years, Felicity said softly. "Can you believe it? Some days it feels like 40 minutes. Other days it feels like I have known you my whole life." "I feel the same way." She leaned against him and he put his arm around her. They fit together as perfectly now as they had that first time he held her on the porch after proposing. "You remember what I said to you that day in town?" Frederick asked. "When I offered you the job, you said a lot of things that day." "I said I saw your worth, and I did. I still do." More every day. Felicity looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You changed my life, Frederick Patterson. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. Love. You did the same for me. I was so lost before you came along. You brought light into my life when everything was dark." They kissed then, a sweet, gentle kiss that spoke of 40 years of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, Frederick rested his forehead against hers. "Come home," he said softly. "I am home. I have been home since the day I met you." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Frederick thought about all the twists of fate that had brought them together. If he had not been in town that day, if he had not looked out the window at just the right moment, if he had been like all the other ranchers and turned her away, their lives would have been completely different. They never would have built this life together, never would have had their children and grandchildren, never would have created the legacy that would live on long after they were gone. But he had been there. He had seen her worth when no one else did. And she had taken a chance on a quiet cowboy who offered her a home. In 1918, Frederick fell ill with influenza. The pandemic that was sweeping the world had finally reached even their remote corner of Colorado. For weeks, Felicity nursed him, barely sleeping as she tried to break his fever and keep him hydrated. The whole family feared they would lose him, but Frederick was stubborn, and with Felicity by his side, he fought his way back to health. It was a long, slow recovery, and he never quite regained all his strength. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. "You are not allowed to leave me," Felicity said one day as he was recovering. "We have a deal, remember, until death do us part, and I am not ready for that part yet." "I am not going anywhere," Frederick promised. "I still have too much to live for." As the 1920s began, Frederick and Felicity were both in their 60s. They had officially retired from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving it in Robert's capable hands. But they still lived in the house they had shared for over 40 years, and they still walked the property every day, checking on the horses and enjoying the land they loved. They had 8 grandchildren now, with more on the way. Florence had married and had 3 children of her own, though she still taught school in Denver. Franklin had also married and had 2 children while working for the railroad. And Robert's 4 children were growing up fast, with the oldest already expressing interest in taking over the ranch someday. The Patterson legacy was secure, built on the foundation that Frederick and Felicity had created so many years ago. One spring morning in 1925, Frederick woke to find Felicity already up and dressed. "Come with me," she said. "I want to show you something." She led him out to the pasture, to a spot where they had stood countless times over the years. The grass was green with new growth and wildflowers dotted the landscape. In the distance, horses grazed peacefully. "You know what today is?" Felicity asked. Frederick thought about it. "Our anniversary is not until December." "Not that. Today is the day, 49 years ago, when I arrived in Cherry Creek. The day I started getting rejected by every rancher in town. The day that led me to you." Frederick pulled her close. "The best day of my life then, even if I did not know it yet. Mine too." She looked up at him, her green eyes still as bright and beautiful as they had been all those years ago. "I want you to know something, Frederick. I have loved every single moment of our life together. Even the hard times, even the sad times, I would not trade any of it. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You saw my worth when everyone else saw nothing. You loved me when I felt unlovable, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift." "You do not have to try," Frederick said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have always been worthy. From the very first moment I saw you, sitting on those steps looking like you were ready to take on the world, I knew you were someone special. I am the one who has been blessed, Felicity. You made my life worth living." They stood there in the morning sun, holding each other and remembering all the years that had brought them to this moment. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through hard work and love and determination. Frederick lived to be 73 years old. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1928, with Felicity holding his hand. His last words to her were simple: "Thank you for saying yes." Felicity lived for another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent those years writing down more stories, making sure that future generations would know about the quiet cowboy who had seen her worth and given her a home. She wanted them to know about the love they had shared, the life they had built, and the legacy they had created together. She passed away in the summer of 1933, and the whole town of Cherry Creek turned out for her funeral. People spoke of her strength, her kindness, her incredible skill with horses. But mostly, they spoke of the love story she had lived, the kind of love that came along once in a generation if people were lucky. Robert took over the ranch completely then, running it with the same care and dedication his parents had shown. He made sure the Patterson Ranch continued to thrive, breeding the finest horses in Colorado, just as his mother had dreamed. He told his children and grandchildren the story of how Frederick and Felicity had met, how she had been rejected by every rancher in town, until a quiet cowboy said he saw her worth and offered her a home. "That is what love is," Robert would tell them. Seeing someone's worth when the whole world is blind to it, offering them a home when they have nowhere else to go, building a life together one day at a time, through good times and bad. That is what your grandparents taught me, and I hope you will remember it always. The story became part of the Patterson family legend, passed down through generations. Frederick and Felicity's great-great-grandchildren would still visit the ranch more than a century later, walking the same land their ancestors had worked, hearing the stories of two people who had found each other and built something beautiful together. And in the small cemetery on the edge of the property, under two simple headstones, Frederick and Felicity Patterson rested side by side. Together in death as they had been in life, their love story complete, their legacy secured, their worth proven beyond any doubt. They had lived a good life, a full life, a life built on love and hard work and the simple truth that sometimes when everyone else turns you away, all it takes is one person to see your worth and say, "Come home." The Patterson Ranch still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they believe in each other. The horses they bred and trained were known throughout the West for their quality and temperament, and the methods Felicity developed are still used by trainers across the country. But more than that, the ranch stands as a reminder that worth is not always obvious, that sometimes the best partnerships come from the most unlikely beginnings, and that true love can overcome any obstacle when two people are willing to fight for it together.